Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live, where we are focusing on Beyond Burnout, why women are stepping back and stepping out of senior positions. Our LinkedIn Lives are always interactive, so we encourage you to post your questions into the comments box, and we are going to get right into it. Today's guest is the one and only Jodi Kovitz, who is a leader, a brand builder, a connector of people, a passionate visionary, and the CEO of the Human Resources Professionals Association, also known as HRPA. And prior to the HRPA, Jodi founded Move the Dial, a movement advocating for the growth and equitable participation of all women in tech, affecting the lives of over 60,000 people worldwide. Now, she is also one of our recipients of our Top 25 awards. Jodi, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a true pleasure to be here to chat with you today about this very important topic.
I always love chatting with you, and we have a number of questions. I have a couple of my own, and then we are going to pop into some audience questions. So again, thank you to everyone who's joining today. Make sure you pop your questions into the comments box. Jodi, first question on my end. What's your take on why women are increasingly stepping away from senior positions? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a loaded question and very complex, but I'm delighted to share a few thoughts. I think, the concept of the engagement, growth, and retention of senior leaders in the workplace is really an art. It's not a science. There are so many factors that go into enabling seasoned executives to stay in the workforce. There is a combination, when you ask me the question, my mind goes to combination of some real systemic challenges that are not new. I'm not going to be the first person to share these ideas, but certainly systemic barriers, and particularly for folks who live with multiple intersecting identities, women of color, for example, women living with disabilities, face greater systemic barriers. So we'll get to that in a moment. But then, in addition to systemic barriers, there's also, a really important point around how are companies and employees approaching that art of engagement and retention in a way that works for the individual. And I think there's so much that employers can do to really enable leaders to be successful, and particularly after the pandemic. So I'm just going to park the systemic barriers for a minute. We'll come back to that. Clearly, we'll talk about that, and that's not novel. Women, of course, are paid less than men, and we have all the data around looking at 89 cents still in 2024. Unreal. And of course, there can be toxic environments, all these systemic issues that we'll come back to. But in terms of something that I think is really interesting right now, and a huge opportunity, because I'm a lemonade kind of person, and as you know, sometimes annoyingly so to my daughter, I'm so positive, but I believe there's a real opportunity in taking the flexibility that the pandemic enabled. We can work in hybrid ways. We can work in sort of different formats and with different hours, right? We know we can, but I think right now employers have an opportunity to say, how do we leverage what we learned from the pandemic and not really hold steadfast to traditional work hours or traditional office attendance? Because as we know from tons of data and research, women are bearing the brunt of more caregiving responsibilities. This is not news. And it's not only women. I just want to caveat, there's lots of caregivers who identify as men or who are primary parents who are men, but we're here talking about this today. So we learned in the pandemic, and I mean myself included, CEO, mother, we can flow between our roles, and we can do it if we have some flexibility in our lives, and the pandemic provided that flexibility. Orgs that are saying we have to be back in office 5 days a week, orgs have to have, C-suite and VP executives, and frankly, everybody back mandatory 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. This is taking away some of the individual flexibility that some folks need. And you're hearing what's very interesting, many folks who are in very senior leadership roles that are colleagues of mine at banks will say, people just aren't coming. Women are not coming They're just saying, I don't care that you're telling me I have to be here 3 days a week. Like, I can't, I won't. I will get my work done. I will work 12 to 14 hours a day, but I need to flow, and I'm used to it, and I know I can. And so I think making sure that we enable that kind of flexibility in work hours, in our expectations, and that we actively and intentionally support that in a bespoke way for what folks need. And that means different things for different folks. And it's not even by their identity, it's in terms of their individual need. And that's a huge opportunity. It's something certainly at the HRPA. We've just launched our Vision 2027. Part of that is really building a best-in-class idea strategy. And part of that means that our hybrid work and environment has to enable that. You can't be inclusive of all folks if you mandate one style of working today. I believe, even though, I am a person personally who likes to be in the office. I have an office. I like to go to it. I always did. Even in my early mom days, 15 years ago, I'd put my child to bed and run back to my office and work till 2 a.m. and go home. Like, I like an office, but just because that's my own personal working style doesn't mean that works for everybody. So, we have to really be mindful of how do we leverage this opportunity that we glean from the pandemic to create novel new environments that can allow everyone to thrive, including folks with disabilities, in new ways that can work in a more hybrid, flexible way or remote way successfully, and including women in particular, who we don't want to lose from our workforce, that we don't want to step out of the company, and we don't want to lead towards burnout by expecting them to come back to the historical way of working, which really didn't have any flexibility. So I'll pause there in case you have any thoughts to add. There's so much more I can say on this topic.
I love it. And there's so much that you've hit the nail on the head, where number one, it's an art. And we need to look at it as an art. It is about engagement. It is about retention. And also it has to work for the individual. I think that's key there. One policy does not fit all. And just with what you were talking about right now, the importance of dynamic environments. But I want to throw something at you.
Yeah.
Because here is the thing. Life throws us curveballs. There are things that happen in life, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally. I do this really powerful pre-question when I do keynotes where it's, I wish my peers and colleagues knew, and the stuff that comes out of the audience, it will move you and it will make you take a step back and assess and reassess. I was sharing with you earlier, over the last number of weeks, I've had some health challenges and I'm okay. But there were a few weeks in there where there were uncertainty and there were questions and there's all these things. And that makes you take a step back and say, okay, where am I spending my time? Who am I spending my time with? What am I spending my time doing? And again, you're assessing and reassessing. And so when life is throwing you these curveballs, and that's just one example, how can organizations, with the help of HR, address that? But also the question to it is it their role to do so?
Yeah, great question. And thankfully you're okay. And thank you for sharing that. And I think, part of what we model that's really important as women leaders to encourage folks to stay is to show up as authentically as we can with all of our things, right? We are all in many roles and confronting the reality of our humanity while we're also CEOs building companies, and as you are, and trying to impact the world positively. So thank you for sharing that. It's not a small thing. I think that HR has a huge opportunity in this moment in particular. There is such an important need to enable folks' mental well-being. This is, of course, again, I'm not the first one to talk about it, but I think the more we talk about our mental well-being, our wellness, our mental health in the workplace, the more it becomes acceptable to talk about it. I think that HR plays, and I've seen it in my own experiences and certainly through the 24,000 members that the HRPA has, like HR can be such a conduit for teaching, learning, training, enabling, creating brave spaces to talk about what people are going through, and not just through formal policies and systems, not just through providing benefits programs that are flexible and really supportive for folks, but also being a sounding board, being a support to navigate these challenges. And I think it is, there's certainly, and even in my own experience as being a C-level executive, where you're going through something difficult and you think you should just carry it yourself. and not share it and not reach out for help. But in fact, if you do reach out for help, your HR partner is there in a confidential way to support you as an individual, but also you can see that multiplied in terms of the collectives. How do we create and enable systems? And I think there's so much opportunity now, leveraging AI, thinking about how we can leverage tools, new technology tools to support folks. Inkblot, for example, there's lots of programs that are available to help folks at scale when you're in a large organization that can enable folks to navigate and figure out what their needs are in their piece of art. And one of the things I was going to say to you, it's sometimes when you think about senior women and retention and the kind of support, HR has a role to play, but so do folks peers, so do folks superiors, and so do folks, if you have a board you report to. Like, it's really everyone's responsibility to work together to think about engagement and retention all the time. Support is one part of it, but there's other pieces to it. I'll give you a personal example. It's just like a little bit of an interesting story. I personally recently applied to take an executive program that I'm very excited to pursue. My board supported my request and investing in my growth as a CEO. I'm very, very excited to take this program. And that support from my board, that they believe in me, that they support me, that they believe my results, so far to date at the HRPA justify the investment, made me feel like 100% more committed. I already was committed. But what was interesting, I was out of town with my daughter last week. I'd taken her on a PA day to a concert in New York, actually. It was a special birthday for her. And then she got sick. She got terrible food poisoning. But I had a board meeting and I wanted to be at my desk and be in top shape. And I found a car and he drove us back to Canada. And I was determined to not miss the board meeting. I probably would have, typically I don't miss important things like that, but the zeal that I felt as the CEO and my commitment, I noticed, was accelerated by the support I was feeling from my board in that moment and the support I was feeling from my team. It actually made me more committed to my job and more engaged. And so it's interesting. That's not a tool you would necessarily automatically think of, but those kinds of things can also go a very long way to understanding the individual and what motivates them. In some cases, it's really not more money. In some cases, it's not even mental support. It really is just, what do you need as an individual leader that's going to float your boat and get you feeling more engaged and want to stay here for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing that about your daughter. Happy birthday to her. And I have so many stories similar to that, which I won't get into, but a lot of what you're talking about too, you need to have trust and belonging within the organization. If you do feel comfortable going to your HR partner to share what might be happening, whether it's personally or professionally. And I love what you just said. Oftentimes we say, it starts at the top or it starts with HR, but we show the way by leading the way. It actually starts with every single one of us and how we choose to act, react, and interact. And thank you for bringing up the piece about mental health and well-being as well. On May 13th, our LinkedIn Live is going to focus on mental health in the workplace. And I think that's such a critical component to that. Now, I want to get into this question because I think it's important. It's common to see microaggressions happening to women at work, and those who experience them are 3 times more likely to think about leaving their roles. Now, how do you think a toxic work environment affects these women, and how can we address this problem?
Yeah, it's a really important question. What I'll start with is this. Toxic work environments, which can come to fruition for many reasons, do not only impact women. They impact every human. And, with respect to women, there's some unique challenges. Gender-based discrimination, of course, harassment, exclusion, and I don't want to talk about women as a monolith. I am a highly privileged senior executive woman. I am white, I am straight, I am able-bodied, I am cisgender. I have many, many privileges in my life. So recognizing that, folks who do have historically felt marginalized or suffered discrimination on multiple intersections of their identity, from everything I've read and listened to on my own journey of really trying to study and become a champion and ally of equity and inclusion, have come to understand it's so much worse, that toxicity. And we don't, I will forever be on that journey in terms of leading a workplace, in terms of creating a community, and in terms of just being a human who cares to learn these things. But I think we have to be really, really open and mindful of that. And it takes a great degree of intentionality to even talk about this issue in an inclusive way. I think there's so many different ways to address the issue. Clearly, table stakes, education, training, conversation, identifying biases, getting folks in your organization to all get to at least a minimum place around understanding terminology, how we speak to people, how do we behave in inclusive ways, taking ownership where we actually make mistakes, because we all make mistakes in this regard. But I think that, and I think sort of saying, if you're in a leadership role of any kind, you don't just have to be the CEO, manager of a team. I am committed personally to creating as psychologically safe of a work environment as I can, and doing the personal work to understand, what does that mean? How do we create a culture of respect, empathy, capital B, belonging, which is obviously so difficult to do, but it's a everyday program. It's not like a tick mark, you did a little belonging. But you can kind of go bottom up from some of these tactical things, creating ERGs, really empowering folks to spearhead initiatives at a company scale, making sure that it's a shared initiative. There isn't just the AERG doing the labor of what, in fact, the CEO and the leadership team have to be doing, and getting everybody involved, to creating support programs and ways for folks to come forward in a brave way where they do feel psychologically safe, their anonymity will be respected. And by the way, where they need support, there are policies, programs, and instant systems in place to support somebody who's identifying that they're experiencing microaggressions or any kind of toxicity that's harming them. But also, there's the tactical, practical, those are some of the things we got to do about it. But I think at the highest order, it really is, to get away from, having highly toxic workplaces outside of what do we do if we have one, and how do we solve for that with diagnostics and building a plan and really dealing with it as an emergent issue to fix. There's also how do we create a really inclusive workplace that would promote a high degree of mental wellness and empathy, but also diversity on our teams, which is a key factor to enable folks to feel that they belong. And that really goes to the pipeline. And I think we're not, it's certainly something it's top of mind for me, and we really actively have to work on ourselves at the HRPA, and it's on our agenda. We're deep into building a 4-year idea strategy. We're partnering with Feminuity, who I've worked with extensively at Move the Dial, to really build a thoughtful and intentional strategy. But if we don't have a pipeline where equity is at the center of what we're trying to do, to build out not just gender parity, obviously, as an executive priority, but beyond gender, thinking about multiple intersecting identities. And, what I learned in all of my journey is they're not only so obvious, right? There could be 33 plus different ways in which people identify. Getting that kind of pipeline right from the beginning, early days, and then really cultivating an environment where we don't have what McKinsey calls the great breakup, where director level folks leave because there's nobody above them to enable support, or the culture is too toxic. So I think it is this multifaceted approach of tactical policy, role of HR, role of individual team leaders, lots of training and tactics, but also a high level commitment and strategic priority, plus intentionality around how long term are we going to enable as safe as we can workplaces, and make sure that we have a team that reflects the diversity of our population, so that folks even feel they are reflected at their leadership teams throughout. And that's a huge project, certainly for us at the HRPA. I am very well aware of that, and we are actively working at it, and beyond.
I love it, Jodi. Thank you so much. And the piece about intersectionality is incredibly important. And that's why we added a plus next to our name, because there are so many different intersecting factors that impact literally every single experience that we have. And I often say about belonging is not a program, policy, or initiative, right? It's an experience. And it's about
Yes.
creating those moments of belonging. And I appreciate that you said, it's not a check mark activity. You don't just do a piece of belonging today and that's it. It's something that's ongoing. Even this idea of trust. Trust is something that we earn through small, consistent actions over time. I have so many more questions for you. I am going to end on one before we go to the audience questions. Those who are joining in live today, please pop in your question into the comments. I've got one last one, and then we're going to come to your questions. My last question to you is this: how can building strong networks help women in the workplace?
Yeah, there's nothing more important from my perspective to your career success and your wellness in your career and your life than having a powerful network where you have folks there to support you, guide you, move the dial for you, for lack of a better word, sponsor you, and really cheer you on, but also help you do hard things and also reflect you when you need advice, and maybe make mistakes along your career. From my perspective, my relationships, which is sort of how I refer to my own network, are the outside of, my family, of course, but like my most important asset in my life. And it's sometimes hard when we're busy, as you know, to invest in intentionally and cultivate those networks. But I will say that for me, I've been super fortunate to cultivate a network of varied individuals over the year, peers, bosses, mentors who turned into sponsors, who opened doors for me, talked about me when I wasn't in the room positively, championed for my and my team's success, created opportunities for me, and who really believed and continue to believe in me. And without that, I would never be where I am today. I really, truly believe that. So this is what I want to spend the time saying before we go to questions. Sometimes it can seem a little far away if you're more junior in your career, or even if you're senior in your career and you've been out of touch with some folks. It's not as hard as you think to be really intentional about how to cultivate your network. And one approach that I often coach folks I sponsor on, and I wrote about it in my book, Go Out of Your Way, was the concept of creating a hub for yourself. So if you think about your goals, often I'll coach people to say, what are two of your current professional goals? So for example, Rumeet, if you have a revenue goal this year, because you have to make a certain revenue to enable your team and all of the things, or do you have a goal professionally to do some growth or build a new product? Well, who are two people in your world that you have or don't have who might be able to very particularly help and coach you on those two goals? Very easy. And if you don't know the person, go find a person. I often say, just say hello. Just say, hi, I'm Jodi. I'd love to connect with you and learn from you. You did this successful thing. Could I buy you a coffee and see if there's some connection, and then cultivate a relationship from there? Similarly, if you said, no, Jodi, I want to get on a public board and one nonprofit board. Well, who do you know that's a hub and spoke person that could connect and have you top of mind to go out of their way and put you on the board? By the way, often for women in particular, you don't get on those big, I call them big boy boards. I know that's kind of a funny thing to say, but those really important A+ boards without an advocate who's going to help you. So find people that can help you with that. And if you have a personal goal in your life, you want to run a marathon, find some folks who've done it, who can coach you. And those 6 people become your hub. And every so often you evaluate and change. But it's really about what can you put into your relationships so that you can cultivate meaningful, authentic relationships so that people truly believe in you and want to help you. And that's sort of a piece of advice I would share, is network is absolutely critical. If you don't have one or it's not strong, focus energy on it. Be really intentional. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. You can just make it 6 people, but give first, because relationships are a two-way street. And I'll stop there. I know we're short for time.
No, and I was just going to say that it is a two-way street. It's not just what can you do for me. It has to be mutual, and I think that's important. I think we're all writing notes. It's like hub, spoke, 2 people. Here are my 2 goals. So thank you for that. I think that's incredibly valuable. The first question I'm going to go to from the audience is, the research is confusing. Some telling us that productivity is at an all-time high with a new way of working, and others telling us it's the opposite. What is your experience?
Do you want me to take that?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I believe. I believe if people are engaged, if people feel they belong in an environment, if they feel seen and valued, they will contribute. And, that to me, contribute means be productive, right? They will give it their best. They will go out of their way. They will give their full selves. If they don't feel seen, valued, heard, respected, engaged, i.e., if they don't feel they belong, they're checking out. I don't think there's you can't generalize. There's so many different individuals in every individual situation, but I think the research is confusing, and I think part of it is we're living through a very hard time. We have to acknowledge that. Outside of folks recovering from pandemic and so many individuals having actually lost humans and been deeply affected negatively in many ways. Certainly, I lost my business during the pandemic, and that was very difficult. People lost lives. That was very difficult. People have long COVID. People are just recovering, even though it's been several years. I still think people are kind of recovering and trying to find a new state. The economy has been very difficult. The climate is incredibly depressing and causing major problems for individuals and countries and our children, and everybody's kind of got that stress, as well as we look at around the world and so much pain and horror happening in the Middle East and globally with so many challenges. So people are stressed, people are tired, people are burnt out from macro trends, never mind trying to then go back to less flexible work or higher expectations to come to the office. And so I think we can't speak about any people in one way. There are so many different ways in which people are affected, but I think both things can be true. If folks feel if we go out of our way to make people feel valued and provide some flexibility, we can probably get the best out of our people, but at the same time mindful that it's a really hard time in the world.
It's a very hard time in the world. And it has been a very hard time in the world for a number of years. And people carry that with them when they step into the workplace. Whatever's happening personally and or professionally, it impacts how we show up. One more question for you. How do the pressures and challenges faced by women in leadership roles contribute to burnout? And how do these differ from the experiences of their male counterparts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. And I think it actually connects to a lot of just what you just said. Like the pressures and challenges faced by women, faced by everyone, it differs. It depends on the individual. We have no idea what someone else is going through. We have no idea what someone else is experiencing personally. Maybe they're caring for elder parents. They're a part of the sandwich generation. They may be going through health stuff. They may be paycheck to paycheck. We have no idea. And I know that there is a school of thought where, you leave your personal side at home and your professional life. They're two different things. You don't bring it with you. And I always say my job isn't to change your perspective on that, but make no mistake that the people that we lead and serve and that we connect with are absolutely bringing whatever is happening in their lives with them as they show up. And so when we think about pressures and challenges faced by women in leadership roles, when we don't take time to rest, when we don't take time to recover, absolutely that's going to impact and contribute to burnout. Now, you mentioned the piece about belonging as well. We know, and research shows, there's a wonderful article in the Harvard Business Review that talks about how when we don't belong, that increases alienation, burnout, and underperformance, but also we have one foot out the door. And so we need to take that into consideration. And I think challenges faced by women may be different than men, or however you identify, we are all facing challenges. And that's the key piece there, is we have no idea what someone else might be going through. And so when we think about burnout, we need to approach it from that lens. So that would be my take on that. Jodi, to close us off.
I love that. And I think creating space, like, one of the practices we use in my team is we often will share, how are you feeling today in one word, or what's your head noise today? Like, just because once you get it out and everybody can share some empathy, then we can get on to business and people actually can be a bit more connected and understood. Yeah. And I would say I completely agree with all of that. I mean, today was a classic example. I drove my child to school to meet with the teacher at 8:00, dealing with a difficult situation, and then ran to the hospital where my mom's having surgery. And then my niece needed a ride to school. And then I was back at my desk for like our weekly business review operational meeting and then talking to you. So, it's about flowing. And I think recognizing that folks who are senior leaders have no lesser ambition. We just may need to do it a little differently. And I think that is a huge opportunity for the way forward, is recognizing, I was working all day yesterday. I say to my team, don't deal with my emails on Sunday, but like I have 6 hours on Sunday. So that's when I can deal with the things before I have to get to Monday morning, momming before I sit at my desk. So like flow in, flow out, be you. And the more some of us with the privilege of being in a leadership role can talk about it honestly, I hope that it can enable folks who are listening to feel seen and heard, and feel a little tiny bit more free to show up as themselves, flowing in and out of their roles.
I love that. What a perfect way to end our conversation. We're flowing in and out. I too email on the weekends, and then it's just because I have time, do not respond to that. I appreciate that so much. And the fact that you did take time to talk to all of us today. Jodi, thank you so much for joining us. You were talking a lot about the importance of networks and the people that you connect with in your network, they become sponsors and so on. And I'd add to that they become friends. And I would also say, and I've said this quite a bit the last couple of weeks, that friends are the family that you choose, and you are a part of the family that I choose. So thank you so, so much for making sure that you came today and you did that. And especially with everything that's going on, we appreciate you so much at the Women of Influence Plus community, me personally. If you are not connected to Jodi Kovitz on LinkedIn, please be sure to do that. Thank you everyone for your time today, for your questions, your comments. I know that the comments are on fire right now. Lots of focus on hybrid and flexible work setups, so that's very interesting. I'm Rumeet Billan, CEO of Women of Influence Plus. Our next LinkedIn Live is May 13th, where we focus on mental health in the workplace. Until we connect again, please take good care of yourselves and have a great start to the week. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Jodi.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Bye, everyone.